Alright, hi everyone. This is a Mars Hill Grammar 4 lecture for the 30th of November over lesson 11. If you didn't already read my email, please upload your quiz to your Google Classroom under the tab for that assignment. And if you did any of the optional worksheets, you can include those in that PDF that you upload, and I will add those to your quiz grade at 2% per completed worksheet. Okay. Also, we're going to meet on Friday for our normal class at 12, and I will send out a Zoom link later for that. Okay, so lesson 11. Let's get into it here. So your only review grammar is the perfect and pluperfect subjunctive active. But when I've graded quizzes recently, I've noticed that the present and imperfect subjunctives are also a little rusty. So I'm going to pull up. Yeah, here we go. Here's our subjunctives. I want you to go ahead and keep reviewing the present and imperfect. And that will certainly come up on your quizzes anyway. So remember, for the present subjunctive, all you have to do to make it subjunctive rather than indicative is change your vowel. So for the first conjugation, we normally have an A, so amo, amas, amat. All you need to do to make it subjunctive is change that A to an E. For the second conjugation, our vowel is long E, so instead of that, we have EA. So we're just adding the A. In the third conjugation, we have normally a short E, and that changes to an A, as you see. The third IO is going to be just like the fourth conjugation. So instead of I, we have IA. So if you want to remember the subjunctive rule for the present, it's EEA. And your conjugation of assume is its own thing that you just have to memorize. So that's the rule for the present. That works the same way in the passive as it does the active. All you change to make it passive then is to put the passive personal endings on rather than the active personal endings. For the imperfect subjunctive, all we're doing is we're using the infinitive, the present active infinitive, and adding our personal endings. So the second principal part of amo is amare, which is to say the infinitive is amare. So we just add mst, mustis, und. Same with monere, regere, capere, audire, and esse. So you just add the personal endings. And again, that's the same in the passive. You just add passive personal endings. Okay, but then what you're supposed to review this week is the perfect and the pluperfect subjunctive active. So the perfect subjunctive active is very similar to the future perfect indicative active. So the future perfect indicative is amavero, amaveris, amaverit, amaverimus, amaveritis, amaverint. So you see the only case that is, the only person and number that is different from the future perfect is amaverim, the first case. And that goes along with all the other conjugation words too. The only difference between the future perfect indicative and the perfect subjunctive is that first person singular, which is erim instead of ero. But if you were looking at how it's put together, the perfect subjunctive is the perfect stem amav plus erim. All right. Okay, then the pluperfect is going to be the same. You want to start with your perfect stem, amav, and we're adding, in this case, isem. And that goes for the rest of the conjugations. You're adding ism. And ism is actually sm, but when it's stuck in the middle of the word there, the E changes to an I. So really that's the imperfect subjunctive of sum added to the perfect stem. So we get amavisem, amavises, amaviset, etc. And the same across the board. I'll make a couple of notes here. People are still having trouble getting the stems correct. So for amo, people get it correct. It's amav. You go to the third principal part and drop the I. Same for moneo. People get manu from manui. But then people often forget to change the G to an X in rego. So it goes rego, regere, regere, rexi. So the perfect stem is rex, right there, rex. Same with copio. The only difference is the first principal part, or the present stem, is going to be cop, but the perfect stem here is kep. So if you're doing a perfect system tense, make sure you use the perfect stem. And again, the fourth conjugation is pretty easy. People rarely fail on that. Okay, so going back, that's our review grammar. So new material here. We have now the pronoun idem. 1 second, it's not working. There we go. So idem is actually, as you see in the note below, idem is simply the demonstrative pronoun is-ea id with the suffix dem added to the end of each form. So you've learned that verbs can be formed by adding prefixes, but prefixes and suffix can also be attached to other parts of speech in a similar manner. So in this case, we have dem plus the demonstrative pronoun. Where, for example here, idem, eiusdem, eidem, eiundem, eodem. One of the things that happens here that changes is the accusative. You know, the accusative of is eum with an M. But here we see eiundem with an N. That happens actually across the board, as this note tells us. Note that the forms of is ending in M change to N. Okay, so eiundem. Same with ayondem, and let's see, where else does that happen? Aorundem, aorundem, and aorundem again. And those are all the cases where that happens. Okay, another note, the I in idem, the nominative singular, you notice in the masculine nominative singular it has a macron over it. And that macron, I usually don't care about them. This one's a little bit more important because it distinguishes the nominative masculine singular from the nominative and accusative neuter singular. So the masculine is idem and the neuter is idem. So it's a small difference, but if you see the macron, it's going to be the masculine form that you're looking at. Okay, otherwise this is a pretty simple declension to memorize, and that is all I have to say about it. Okay, so, doing that wrong, please hold. Okay, new vocabulary. So the majority of these words are feminine. The only masculine ones are kustos, guard, and timor, fear. So that makes it a little bit easier to memorize the genders of these words. You can look through these derivatives on your own. But I wanted to talk about, let's see. Oh yeah, regio. So regio means region. It's feminine. Notice and, well, remember that there's another word, pars, that also can mean region. So pars partis, another third declension word, also feminine, means part or region. And honestly, I kind of just memorized pars as part and regio as region, just to clear it up for myself. But make sure on the quiz for this lesson you use regio if it asks for region. Okay, another similarity to something else, munitio. We know this word from munio, which means to fortify. Well, munitio is a fortification. So that's pretty easy to remember. Yeah, that's all about the vocab. Okay, now there's some more grammar here for this lesson. So I think when I mentioned a couple weeks ago that there are other ways to do purpose clauses. So there's something called the relative clause of purpose that we're going to get into this week. You've learned that purpose clauses are introduced by ut in the positive or ne in the negative. So that's one way to do a purpose clause. But they may also be introduced by a relative pronoun. And you know the relative pronoun is qui, quae, quod. This is called a relative clause of purpose. So we might say, one way to say this sentence would be milites mitit ut loci naturam explorent. So we have the soldier, or he sends mitit, the soldiers, milites, ut loci naturam explorent, so that, or in order that, ut, explorent, they may find out naturam loci, the nature of the place. With this clause, we put ut there and we add a subjunctive verb. Now, another way to do this is to say milites mitit qui loci naturam explorent. So we're still using a subjunctive verb, but here instead of ut we have qui, from qui, quae, quod. And this is a masculine, masculine nominative plural. So those who. So he sends soldiers who may explore the nature of the place. But we often translate that as in order that they may explore the nature of the place or find out. Okay, so that's another way to do a purpose clause. And you still are going to use your subjunctive verb for these clauses. When a relative pronoun is used instead of ut, the verbs in the clauses must still correspond, and the relative pronoun still follows the pronoun agreement rule. So the pronoun agreement rule, you may need to review that. The pronoun agreement rule is that pronouns agree with their nouns in gender. Let's see, I'll write it out here. Agree in gender, number, but case is, I'm running out of room here. Case determined by own clause, its own clause. So the case may not match the noun it is modifying or describing. Okay, so qui is masculine plural because it agrees with the antecedent milites in gender and number, and it is nominative because it is the subject of its own clause. So here it doesn't match milites, even though it's referring to milites, because in its own clause it's the subject. So that's where it gets its case. if the purpose clause is negative, ne must be used. So you can't use the relative purpose clause in the negative. It has to be with ne. Also, a relative clause of purpose cannot be used if the relative pronoun would agree with the subject of an active verb. So, a relative clause of purpose cannot be used if the relative pronoun would agree with the subject of an active verb. So, for example, Caesar contendebat ut hostes retinet. Caesar was hastening to hold back the enemy. Caesar is the subject of contendebat, so you cannot say Caesar contendebat qui, because it would agree with the subject of the active verb there. Okay, translation hint. One way to know that you are dealing with a relative clause of purpose is if the verb in the relative clause is subjunctive. So many of the relative clauses we've seen so far are just plain old relative clauses like amo, qui, deum, amant. Okay, I love those who qui love God. Qui deum amant. And here we have an active indicative verb with a relative clause. That's just a regular relative. But if we see a subjunctive verb, we have a hint that it might be a relative clause of purpose. Okay, another grammar thing. Latin and English both have 3 words for where. So we have ubi, which means where, in the sense of in what place. We have quo, which means whither, or to what place, and unde, which means whence, or from what place. And I would like you all to memorize the English and the Latin here. I want you to be able to use whither and whence correctly in English, because people try to use it and they sound really dumb when they don't know what whither means, but they use it, or they don't know what whence means. Whither is to where and whence is from where. Okay, so I always make the joke about, or make the comment about Hamilton. He says, don't forget from whence you came. Obviously that doesn't work because whence already means from where. So he's saying from where. So don't be Hamilton. Okay, quo and unde are much more common in Latin than whither and whence are in English. Often the most natural translation of quo and unde is to or from what place, or simply where. But you cannot use ubi to mean whither or whence. Okay, ubi is positional rather than directional. So ubi would mean, you could use that like, where is the coffee? It's in a place. It's not moving to or from somewhere. Okay, one other grammar concept here, or comment here. The ablative singular of causai can be used as a preposition meaning for the sake of. This actually happens quite a lot. You can use causa to mean for the sake of. When used as a preposition, causa follows its object, which is in the genitive case. So, for example, custodis causa is for the sake of the guard, for the sake of the guard. And as we come across that, I'll try to remember and remind you about that. Okay, let me make sure there's nothing else here. That's not what I wanted. Okay, we'll go over this first worksheet really quickly. The perfect subjunctive is identical to the future perfect tense, except for the first person singular. So where it ends in erim instead of ero. See, there we go. Okay, the active perfect and pluperfect subjunctives are built on the perfect stem by adding ere in the perfect tense and isse in the pluperfect tense. Idem is simply the demonstrative pronoun isse id with the suffix dem added to the end of each form. Forms ending in is, or forms of is ending in m are changed to in. Okay, for example, eundem, eandem, eorundem, earundem. Purpose clauses may be introduced by ut or ne or by a relative pronoun. When the answer to question 5 is used, that is, when a relative pronoun is used, it still follows the pronoun agreement rule. If a purpose clause is negative, you have to use ne. A relative clause of purpose cannot be used if the relative pronoun would agree with the subject of an active verb in the main clause. The 3 words for where in Latin are ubi, quo, and unde. Whither means to what place, whence means from what place. And with that, we are done with that worksheet. Okay, save reading number, well, whatever the reading number is for worksheet 6, save that for Friday when we do our class together. And that is all for this evening.